See, the problem with a corporate job is that a corporate job requires you to be at a certain place at a certain time, wearing a certain attire and having to speak in a certain way. And that, my friend, is a big restriction on your freedom. So much of your success in life depends upon your interpersonal skills. And a big part of your interpersonal skills is how good a communicator you are, how good a conversationalist you are. Like, there's so many times when I have been able to get a good deal in a negotiation because of my communication skills. There are so many times I've been able to impress women because of my communication skills. As Nassim Nicholas Taleb said, the three most addictive things in the world are heroin, carbohydrates, and a monthly paycheck. Lads and lasses, hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast, the soon-to-be number one podcast in India. There's a lot that I want to cover on this show that I'm incredibly excited about. Everything noteworthy that took place in the week that went by. You know, everything that I learned through the books that I've been reading, through the podcasts that I've consumed, through other content that I've consumed, as well as through my own life's experiences. Mere Anubhav ke Anubhav. And I'm going to be talking about all of this in my classic style, my usual frivolous manner. That's one of the reasons why I call myself a frivolous geek as well. You know, I can't take things too seriously, or I don't take myself too seriously, but I definitely take like the lessons that I learn from my life's experiences as well as like the content that I consume fairly seriously. You know, while I'm incredibly excited, incredibly happy to be recording this episode, I'm not too pleased about the fact that I have these two pimples now. So I woke up in the morning, I saw myself in the mirror, which is typically what you do as a narcissist. You know, the first thing that you do is see yourself in the mirror when you wake up in the morning. Shout out to all those guys who do the same. If you do so, please let me know in the comment section. But I woke up in the morning, saw myself in the mirror, and I see these two pimples appear out of nowhere. Because I swear when I went off to sleep last night, my skin was flawless. It was absolutely beautiful. And these two ended up appearing this morning. I think I know where they came from, and I'm going to be talking about that as the podcast progresses. But when I was observing myself, observing my beautiful face in the mirror, there's a story to do with pimples that sprung to my mind based upon an interaction that I'd had with a buddy of mine in college. So this interaction I'd had like maybe 5 years or 6 years ago, but I still remember that only because that interaction with that buddy of mine had left a very indelible imprint or a very indelible mark on me. I'm just hoping this pimple doesn't leave an indelible mark, an indelible mark being one that cannot be removed. I hope this is temporary as opposed to being indelible. Now coming to the story and coming to the conversation that I'd had with that buddy of mine. So this friend of mine had a very severe case of acne. He had lots of pimples, lots of blemishes on his face as well as on his body. You know, this area around the shoulders. There are some people who have a body like Baywatch and a face like Crime Watch. This friend of mine had a body like Crime Watch and a face like Crime Watch as well, with due respect to him. I'm pretty sure he's going to chuckle if he hears me say this. And so he had this severe case of acne. And so I remember walking up to him this one time and asking him, buddy, does this affect your confidence at all? And the reason I asked him that question is because he was exceptional when it came to women. Exceptional when it came to women. There was just something about him, maybe the manner in which he spoke, his confidence, the charisma that he exuded that made him very good with women, despite the fact that he had a body like Crime Watch and a face like Crime Watch, and he had lots of blemishes, lots of pimples on his face and other places of his body. And I remember him telling me that, buddy, you shouldn't be caring about these things. Like, the more attention you give this, the more attention the girl that you're speaking with or the girl that you're trying to impress will give it as well. If you just come across as someone who doesn't care, who's nonchalant, who's still confident despite the pimples that might be on your face, you'll have a lot more success with women, all else being equal. Because women will see that as well. Like, women will see the fact that, you know, this guy's someone who doesn't care at all. It's not something that holds him back. It's not something that depletes his confidence. And I absolutely loved that lesson. And so instead of that playing in his head, instead of that holding him back, he was just like, you know what? I have other attributes like my confidence, my charisma, the way I speak, that definitely or severely outweigh this quote unquote negative of mine. Or he doesn't even look at it as a negative. He doesn't look at it as a negative because as a complete package, he knows that he's good enough. Like, he's worthy of being a worthy mate. since we're talking about everything that's wrong with me, let's just, continue in that vein. I'm just kidding. I mean that in a self-deprecating way, because self-deprecating humor is something that I enjoy a lot. It's so sad, speaking of self-deprecating humor, especially sarcasm as well. It's so sad sometimes when I end up using sarcasm or when I end up using self-deprecating humor. There are people who say, oh, you don't necessarily have to be so hard on yourself. I'm like, don't you fucking get it? It's self-deprecating humor. I'm not being hard on myself. In fact, some of the most confident people in the world utilize self-deprecating humor. But I absolutely hate it when people don't get sarcasm or when people don't get self-deprecating humor. That's definitely one of my pet peeves, or one of the many pet peeves that I have. But going back to everything that's wrong about me, I spoke about my pimples, the latest addition to everything that's wrong about me. Let's also talk about this haircut of mine. I think the jury's still out. A lot of people have said it looks good. A lot of people have said it looks absolutely shit. I got this haircut last week. When I got it, I thought it was absolutely shit. I thought it was shit. I didn't like it. It's definitely grown on me, literally as well as metaphorically. You see what I did there? It's definitely grown on me. But when I got the haircut last week, as I was getting the haircut, everything was trending beautifully. Everything was beautiful. Like the barber, I was enjoying like the haircut that the barber was giving me. I was sitting in front of a mirror as the barber was giving me that haircut, and I was liking it. Now what happened is, towards the end of the haircut, according to me, the haircut was close to perfect, but not quite perfect, not 100% perfect. And so, being the hyper perfectionist that I am, being the greedy person I am for perfect results, being so greedy for perfect results, I told the barber, भैया इधर से थोड़ा और छोटा कर दो. It was close to perfect. It was like a 9.9 out of 10 in my eyes, but I wanted to make it a 10 out of 10 because that's exactly what hyper perfectionists end up doing. And मैं बोला था कि अभी 20 है, इसको 19.5 कर दो. It's a 20 right now. उसको 19.5 कर दो on a relative scale. But what he did was he made it from a 20 to an 18. And so ये part थोड़ा चपटा हो गया. It became too flat, which I didn't like. And then I was a bit sad about the fact that I got a bad haircut, or a haircut that wasn't so good, despite the fact that, or a haircut that didn't end up being so good, despite the fact that it was trending really well for the most part because of my hyper perfectionism and because of like being greedy for perfect results. And plus, given the narcissist that I am, a lot of my happiness depends upon how good I'm looking. And then I was reflecting about it. I was reflecting about this whole episode, and it taught me 2 lessons. Like a shitty haircut, getting a shitty haircut, or that particular episode that I had taught me 2 lessons, 2 vital lessons, 2 big life lessons. Now you might be like, Anubhav, you're absolutely crazy. Like, who the hell derives life lessons from like a haircut experience that you had? But that's how I roll. That's how I roll. And I'm absolutely, I'm not one bit embarrassed or one bit mortified about telling you how I roll. The 2 lessons that it taught me. Number 1 being the fact that I think a shitty haircut provides a beautiful opportunity to practice acceptance. A shitty haircut provides an opportunity to get better at the art of acceptance. The second lesson that it taught me is that when you're getting a haircut, and I'm guessing you can apply this in any other context as well, when you're getting a haircut and you feel that your haircut is close to perfect, do not try and aim for complete perfection. And I'll tell you why. When your haircut is close to perfect and you want to tinker with it or change it such that you can achieve absolute perfection, the upside in the form of like the small incremental improvement in going from close to perfect is very minimal. But the downside in the form of the massive damage that it can do to your haircut that's close to perfect is prodigious, is massive. And so there's very minimal upside, but there's massive downside. And so it's a high risk, low reward type of situation. It's a low return, high risk type of situation. Hence, I feel it doesn't make for a good investment. Hence, I feel that you wanting to make a haircut that's close to perfect isn't a good bet because of the minimal upside in the form of the small incremental improvement in going from a 9.9 to a 10. But the massive downside, or the massive potential downside, in your haircut going from a 9.9 to a fucking 5 or a 6 or a 7. A very pithy saying that I recently came across this past week that's actually helping me based upon like the early days, based upon the few days that it's been since the time I actually came across this pithy saying, that's helping me keep my hyper perfectionism in check. One of them, there are actually two, but both are very similar to each other. One of them is, it's better to be consistently good than occasionally great. If you're a hyper perfectionist, frame this somewhere or just tattoo this somewhere. It is better to be consistently good than occasionally great. As a hyper perfectionist, you're always looking to do whatever you plan on doing in a perfect way. But you'll never have like the perfect set of circumstances to do something, as a result of which you never embark upon it. Or even if you embark upon it, you overthink the fuck out of it. And so you might end up producing something, but the entire process of producing it, trying to achieve perfection, is so taxing that you probably won't consistently end up producing it. So you might produce it once or twice. It might be a great product or a perfect product, but it's going to be a very tedious process to produce something that's perfect. As a result of which, it's going to be hard for you to be consistent going forward. Like, in order for something to be consistent and sustainable, it has to be easy. If I tell you every single day, have broccoli, unless of course you're one of those weird fucks who enjoys having broccoli. If I tell you have broccoli every single day, you might do it for one day, you might do it for a few days, you might do it for a week, but then it won't be sustainable. You might not be able to do it every single day. And so if there is something that you plan on doing consistently or in a sustainable manner going forward, it has to be something that you enjoy. But if you feel as if, I have to achieve perfection at what I'm doing, you'll be repelled by it, only because it's gonna, that process or the task that you're doing is gonna be nerve-wracking. What if I don't achieve perfection? Then it's not gonna be good. And so it's better to be consistently good than occasionally great. And another pithy line that I think sums up everything that I've said, so it won't require any explanation, so I'll just read out the line, is don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I think there's a book as well that's titled this or titled something similar to this that you can check out. But again, a beautiful reminder, if you're a hyper perfectionist, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. So remember when I was talking about that pimple story of mine, I mentioned that I think I know where I got the pimples from. So I think I got the pimples from this party that I attended yesterday, and from all the oily food that I ate at that party, because it came as a shock to my body. Because these past couple of weeks or so, I've been incredibly disciplined when it comes to my diet, incredibly disciplined when it comes to my fitness. That's because I'm preparing for a modeling shoot that's coming up in about a month's time. Yes, I am not kidding. I am actually giving modeling a shot. Let's see how it goes. But because I ate oily food after a long time, like after 2 weeks of being completely disciplined, like these past 2 weeks, I had a discipline forged of Bethlehem steel. The oily food came as a shock to my system, to my body, as a result of which I feel, this is my hypothesis, this is my conjecture, I might be totally wrong about this, as a result of which these pimples have sprung up. But I want to talk more about that party and not how it contributed to my pimples. I want to talk about the fact that I thoroughly enjoyed myself at this party that I went to. Look, I'm a conversation junkie. I absolutely love having conversations with people, especially open-ended, free-flowing, organic, light-hearted, frivolous, unfiltered, long-form type of conversations. Like, that is my cup of tea. That is exactly what makes Anubhav Jain tick. Or that's exactly what makes Anubhav Jain feel the most alive. That's one of the reasons why I call myself a conversation junkie as well. Now, when I was at the party, I was enjoying my conversations with people. But there are some people who are a source of boredom, in the sense that when they are having a conversation with someone, they are so fixated or so focused on everything that they are saying that they completely forget about the fact that there's this other person who's part of the conversation as well. They're talking about their interests in a very passionate way, while completely overlooking the fact that their interests might not be the interests of the other person. Like what piques your interest might not pique the interest of the other person. The other person might simply be pretending to be interested in everything that you have to say. And so there's a skill in being a good conversationalist. You've got to ask yourself, like, am I engaging the other person? Is the other person truly interested in everything that I'm saying, or is the other person simply pretending to be interested? And so a big part of being a good conversationalist is actually observing the non-verbal cues of the person that you're speaking with. Observing the body language of the person that you're speaking with. Is the person truly invested in everything that you're saying? Or are you simply boring that other person to death? Don't be so focused on everything that you are saying and so narcissistic where you're simply talking while you might be completely boring the other person or not letting the other person talk. So sometimes if you feel that the other person isn't quite invested in the conversation because the other person might have like a straight face or a dull face or a slightly glum face, or you can probably tell from the body language of the other person that the other person isn't truly invested in the conversation, that's when you can maybe change topics in a seamless manner, change to something else, or better still, ask the other person a question such that you get the other person involved in the conversation as well. But a lot of people fail to do that. A lot of people feel that everything that they are interested in, which they'll definitely talk about in a very impassioned manner because it's something that they're interested in, they assume that the other person is also interested in what they are interested in. But a big part of communication is non-verbal. Communication isn't just verbal. It's not just about everything that you say, but there's a non-verbal component which is as important, if not more important, to being a good communicator or to being a good conversationalist. Am I keeping the other person engaged? And if you're not, then change the topic or allow the other person a chance to speak as well. And I think this is definitely a problem that's a lot more prevalent in older people. Now, the thing with older people that I've seen is that old people can either be sagacious or they can be deranged. And just because you are older doesn't necessarily mean you are wiser. Both don't necessarily go hand in hand. But old people, maybe because they don't have like anyone else to talk to, or maybe because they're deranged, or maybe because they feel they have lots of wisdom to share, sometimes they get children involved or they get younger people involved in a conversation where they're simply talking about themselves. Simply giving gyan. Not quite observing the fact that the other person might not give two shits about what you're saying. Or the other person may have been paying attention for the first few minutes of the conversation, but when you've gone on and on and on and on and on and on, spewing wisdom, like the other person doesn't fucking care. Like give the other person a chance to speak as well, or just be more entertaining, or just change the topic to something else if you see that the other person doesn't seem interested or is simply pretending to be interested. That's the problem with old people, I feel. They're either deranged or sagacious, and they feel that just because they're older, just because they have age on their side, they have truckloads of wisdom to share, which might be the case with some people, but it's not the case with everyone else. And they feel they can speak from a fucking high horse and talk at people or talk to people from a high position of authority, of greater wisdom, as opposed to talking with people. Speaking of old people, I'm growing old now. I'm 30 years old, and February 2023 marks 2 years since the time I started freelancing. So 2 years since I quit the traditional 9-to-5 corporate world and started freelancing. And I'm going to be summing up my experiences as a freelancer these past couple of years, talking about the upsides as well as the downsides. So talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly that's associated with being a freelancer. Let's talk about the upsides first. The most obvious upside associated with being a freelancer is the fact that you have freedom and you have independence. See, the problem with the corporate job is that a corporate job requires you to be at a certain place, at a certain time, wearing a certain attire, and having to speak in a certain way. And that, my friend, is a big restriction on your freedom. That's the downside that's associated with a corporate job. Naval Ravikant once said, beautiful quote, he said, "A taste of freedom can make you unemployable." Now, what that means is that once you've actually experienced freedom, what freedom feels like, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to go back to your former, more restricted ways. You know, corporate job, like sometimes when you're inside like your fancy skyscraper of your multinational company, it can feel as if you're in a royal jail or a gilded cage. You feel trapped. You're answerable to people from morning until night. Hence, it takes a toll in your freedom. Now, some people are fine with that. Now, some people are like, look, a corporate job gives me a lot more stability than freelancing does. And so the lack of freedom is a good price to pay for the stability or for the other benefits that I get from doing a corporate job. But if freedom, if independence are very high on your list of values in terms of what you value, if freedom and independence is high up in the pecking order, then it's very hard for you to do a corporate job, like a traditional corporate job that requires you to be at a certain place, at a certain time, wearing a certain attire and having to speak in a certain way every single day or for too long. It becomes incredibly difficult. And that's something that a lot of people experienced during COVID as well. They experienced a taste of freedom. Because during COVID, you were working from home. You weren't necessarily seeing the ugly face of your boss on a daily basis. You weren't necessarily answerable to your boss at every hour. Like तुम्हारे सिर पर तलवार नहीं लटकी हुई थी, जो कभी-कभी लगता है when you're in that office environment, when you feel, oh, your boss is lurking, your boss is observing everything that you're doing. I'm being observed right now. You were working from home. And so when you were working from home, a lot of people definitely felt a greater degree of freedom, if not 100% freedom, because they were still doing the corporate job, except that they were doing so from home. You were definitely experiencing a much greater degree of freedom than you experience when you're working from an office environment. And so that's why when things started opening up and there were some offices who were calling their employees back to the office and required them to come into the office at least a few days of the week, if not all days of the week, it became very difficult for people to readjust to their former ways, their former more restricted ways. A taste of freedom makes you unemployable. It became very hard for them to actually go back to their former restricted ways. So that pretty much sums up like the upsides that are associated with freelancing, right? The biggest upside being the freedom and the independence. Now, to a layman, to an outsider, to someone who hasn't experienced freelancing, it might seem as if freelancers have all the freedom in the world or their life is very envious. And that freedom is definitely something that you enjoy. But freelancing also comes with lots of other downsides. Downsides that people in a corporate job don't experience. The first being the money aspect. See, with freelancing, there's a lot of uncertainty that you have to contend with. You might not have projects coming in every single day. Now, projects are what give you income as a freelancer. You work on a project, you get paid for working on the project. So it's not the same bi-weekly and monthly paycheck that you end up getting, because how much you earn depends upon like the projects that you're working on. So you could go for like 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, sometimes even more at a stretch without having done any significant project that's brought in like a non-trivial amount of income for you. As Nassim Nicholas Taleb said, the 3 most addictive things in the world are heroin, carbohydrates, and a monthly paycheck. It feels good when every couple of weeks or at the end of each month, there's like an amount that hits your bank balance every single day. It feels good. As much as like a corporate job might suck in some other ways, it feels very good when you know that on a bi-weekly basis or every 4 weeks, I will be getting a paycheck regardless of how much work that I've put in these past couple of weeks or this entire month. It's a good feeling. But with freelancing, it's a lot more erratic. It's a lot more sporadic in terms of your flow of money. There could be like a 1 month period where you end up earning a lot. But as I said, there could be like a barren spell of like 3, 4, 5 months that you go for where you don't end up earning that much. And when you move or when you transition from a corporate job to leading the life of a freelancer and you're not getting that bi-weekly paycheck or you're not getting that monthly paycheck, when someone all of a sudden just like turns off the supply of money or maybe makes it inconsistent or sporadic or erratic, it's difficult. Like it's difficult for you to adjust. You sometimes feel, where is my next source of money going to come from? Where's my next project going to come from? Where's my next paycheck going to come from? And you feel that monetary insecurity, even if you already have like savings with you, even if you have like a strong cushion of savings, having earlier been used to getting a constant supply of money at a constant frequency, to not having that anymore takes some getting used to. Sir par talwar latki rehti hai. Oh, I need to be finding my next project. I need to be finding my next source of income, which is a good thing. Sometimes stress is good. Like the fear of failure or stress can definitely drive you to do work. When you know that you have your backs against the wall, the only way in which you can move is forward. When you know that you're down and out, you've hit rock bottom, the only way in which you can move is up. And so you can definitely leverage that stress associated with freelancing in a positive way, but it's easier said than done. A lot of people might not have that tenacity or that thick skin or that mental fortitude to be able to look at the positives or be able to channelize their stress in a constructive manner. The other downside that's associated with freelancing that I've definitely been experiencing a lot in the recent past, and in fact, like doing this podcast is helping me a bit in this regard, and I'll tell you why. The other downside associated is loneliness. Something that you don't actually experience in the corporate world, especially if you're going into the office. As much as a corporate job might suck, as much as big a restriction on your freedom as a corporate job might be, at the end of the day, when you're actually going to the office, when you're seeing work colleagues, even though you might end up hating a few of them, you still have like social interactions with them. You have like social connection. You're seeing faces around you. Even if you might not be talking to people, you're still seeing faces around you. We're gregarious people. We evolved from being a part of a tribe. We weren't meant to be alone. We're social animals. So social connection is very, very important for us. Granted, solitude is extremely important. Pablo Picasso said, no great work can be done without solitude. Solitude is very important, but there's a time and a place for both. I think you need to juggle solitude and social connection. Too much of solitude can backfire. The same way too much of social connection can be a distraction. So it's important for you to be juggling both. Look, I love my solitude. I absolutely love my solitude. And the first half of the day, which is when I'm actually recording this podcast right now, the first half of the day, I love being by myself with my thoughts, just doing focused work, doing work that I love doing, reading, or whatever I feel like doing. But then during the second half of the day, like say after 2 p.m.-ish, if I spend too much time indoors alone by myself, I started feeling a bit antsy. I start feeling a bit jittery. I feel like seeing people. Like a little bit of depression sets in because I haven't seen too many faces, or I haven't seen any faces whatsoever. Or I haven't like spoken with people. Like on a daily basis, you feel like expressing yourself. Not just me. Like I might feel like expressing myself a lot more only because I love conversations with people. I love people. I'm an extrovert. But anyone, even introverts, they can't be completely antisocial. If they do so, they'll become like the architects of their own downfall or the authors of their own misfortune. Even they need some degree of social connection. Every single person does because we're social animals. And so loneliness is a big problem that you have to fight or tackle as a freelancer. And this feeling of loneliness or the depression that stems from being too lonely or lonely for a long, long time is exacerbated by the fact that sometimes when you don't have a project, say for instance, you're looking for your next project and you've gone a few weeks or maybe a few months without a project, you might feel guilty for indulging in social interactions because you might feel as if, every single waking hour of mine should be devoted to finding my project because I haven't earned money in quite some time. But you end up just driving yourself crazy by doing that. By thinking that, oh, I'm going to be devoting 16 hours or 17 hours a day, like all my waking hours, to finding my next project, you'll end up driving yourself absolutely crazy. You'll end up tyrannizing yourself, which is something I've done. And I've learned the hard way that I ought not to tyrannize myself. Like even if I don't have a project, or even if I've gone for like a long, long time without a project, yes, work hard, work towards finding my next project or getting my next paycheck. But at the same time, you have to. It's a non-negotiable. It's not a nice to do. It's a must do. You have to carve out time for social interaction, for social connection. It's very important for you to do that. Earlier, I would look at time that I spend shooting the shit with people, chewing the fat with my friends, having fun with my friends, or having just conversations with them, either in person or over the phone, as time that I've wasted because it's a recreational activity. I'm not being productive when I'm doing that. But now I've started to look at these interactions that I'm having, like the trivial interactions, like small talk, as well as like the most significant interactions, as a time investment, because it definitely helps me recharge my batteries. I feel much better about myself. So I may have spent maybe an hour or a couple of hours getting coffee with someone or chatting with a friend of mine, either in person or over the phone. But then once I come back from that interaction, like an hour or a couple of hours later, I come back with a lot more zeal, a lot more fervor, with a spring in my stride, because that interaction has recharged my batteries. And so it ends up helping my work, because now I'm approaching the work in a positive frame of mind, with the right attitude, as opposed to just chipping away at my work while being depressed, which is when I don't do my best work. Like, doing work does not make me happy. Maybe it does, but just doing work does not make me happy. But when I'm happy, I'm doing my best work. And a big source of my happiness is the social interaction that I have with people. Or a big source of anyone's happiness is the social interaction that he or she has with other people. So it's important that regardless of how busy your schedule might be, you ought to carve time out for this, for the sake of your happiness, for the sake of your headspace. And Andrew Huberman, he's a guy that I've talked about on the podcast previously. He's a neuroscientist, and I absolutely love his podcast. It's called the Huberman Lab. I've mentioned the podcast as well. He talked about this in his podcast episode on happiness. I think it was episode number 68. Just check it out. Just type Andrew Huberman happiness on YouTube. I'd suggest watching the entire episode. He talks about lots of tools that you can actually use to enhance your happiness. And one of the tools that doesn't come as a surprise or a secret is social connection. He talks about how important it is for you to be having social interactions as often as possible. And when I say social interaction, that doesn't mean that you have to carve out an inordinate amount of time every single day doing this. Sometimes even the most trivial interactions help a lot. And by trivial, I don't mean this as an insult, because some of those trivial interactions, like the ones that you have with, say, the domestic help that comes to your house, or the security guard in your building, or the shopkeeper when you're purchasing something, those interactions can be very significant as well. They might be short-lived. They might just last for a few minutes, but those interactions can be very significant as well in serving as a pick-me-up for you. I'm not kidding. Sometimes when I might be fried at my desk, I think about going down for a walk for 5 or 10 minutes. I go down and having a 2-minute conversation with a security guard, or just exchanging smiles with the security guard downstairs, lifts my spirits, makes me feel a whole lot better about myself. In fact, even when I was at Goldman Sachs, sometimes I used to be absolutely down in the dumps, down in the doldrums. It's been a long, long night. It's midnight. It's 1 o'clock. And I feel as if, I've got a lot more work on my plate that I have to complete before I can actually go back home. So it's going to be one of those nights where I'm working at silly o'clock. I used to order food maybe at midnight because I'm hungry, go downstairs to pick up my food. And when I've gone downstairs to pick up my food, there was a security guard at Goldman Sachs, a guy from Jamaica, from the West Indies, with whom I used to love having conversations about cricket, because he was a massive cricket fan and a cricket junkie, or a sports junkie. So I used to talk a lot about the West Indies, about India, about Kohli, about what was happening in the world of cricket. And those 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes that I used to spend having that conversation with him, that was simply a byproduct of me having gone down to pick up my food, would lift my spirits, would recharge my batteries. And I would go from feeling like $1,000,000 at the time that I was actually going down to pick up my food to feeling like $1,000,000 at the time that I'm actually coming back up after having picked up my food, because of that conversation that took place between the time I left to pick up my food and the time that I actually picked up my food. That conversation with Laurie, I still remember his name. So some of the things that you can do, some of the things that I have been experimenting with, just so that, I can get that social interaction as a freelancer, especially if you're a freelancer who works, who lives by himself or by herself, which is something that I do. I live in a 1 BHK here in Mumbai. And so it's all the more important for me to actually venture out to get that social interaction, because I can't get it ghar pe, unless of course you have like a pet or you have a partner, but I have neither at the moment. And so if you're someone who works as a freelancer and is working and is living by himself or herself, then experiment with a few things that I've been experimenting with. Like one of them could be working from a cafe. Now, granted, when you work from a cafe, you might not be having interactions with people, but then you end up seeing faces, and even that helps. Knowing that there are people around you helps as well. And who knows, there might be some like cute chica, some hot fucking chicks who might be coming to that cafe. So they serve as eye candy. So that's a bonus as well. Working from a co-working space is something that you could do. Now, granted, it's a bit expensive because you have to pay like a monthly fee or a quarterly fee or an annual fee. But if you think that it's a good investment, such that, it keeps you happy, sane, and gives you like gives you some social capital, then I'd seriously recommend considering working from a co-working space. Something that helps me tremendously is going to the gym in the middle of the day, as opposed to going at the end of the day. Now, I have that freedom and flexibility because I'm working as a freelancer. Now, if you're doing a corporate job, you might not be able to go to the gym in the middle of the day, or you might not have to go to the gym to get your social connection because you go to the office where there are people. But going to the gym in the middle of the day helps me a lot. So I love my solitude in the first half. I do my work. I do a little bit of work during the first half, after which around 12 p.m., 1 p.m., could be slightly later as well sometimes, I hit the gym, because then I can get my social connection, as opposed to leaving my social connection for too late for the evening, because then by the time evening rolls in, I'm already feeling a bit depressed because I've gone for a good 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours without having spoken with people. So I go in the middle of the day, I get my workout done, I see a few familiar faces, that recharges my battery, and then I come back after the gym has served as a breath of fresh air for me. It gives me like a second wind. And then I can approach work again in solitude from my apartment. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is, and you might not need this lesson, it's something that I need to remind myself of a lot more, because I've got a very toxic relationship with time. And in a bit to be a productivity junkie, I sometimes end up driving myself crazy by tyrannizing myself. And I'm going to talk about my relationship with time in detail in a future episode of the podcast, because this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. But in a nutshell, it serves as a good reminder to me that these activities, these so-called recreational activities, at least that's how I used to look at them earlier, and I used to feel as if, no, as a productivity junkie, I ought not to be doing any recreational activities. These should not be looked at as a waste of time. Instead, change your perspective, change your mindset towards these activities. Look at them as an investment. You recharging your batteries, you feeling sane, happier, you preventing yourself from feeling miserable and depressed. And then when you're feeling happy, you'll also do your best work. You'll be a lot more productive then, as opposed to feeling I need to simply be working alone by myself in my man cave or my woman cave for 16 hours a day, because that's what productivity means. I think that's a very shit definition of productivity that a lot of productivity gurus might peddle. But if you've experienced something similar to what I've experienced, then I think you will be able to attest the fact that by following that definition of productivity, you'll simply drive yourself absolutely bloody crazy. Keeping with what the tradition has been on solo episodes of this podcast, I'm now going to be taking in a subscriber question sent to me by the same subscriber, the same guy whose question I featured on the previous episode as well, because None of the others are interested in sending me questions. Can someone else send in questions as well? I'm sick of seeing this guy's face. I'm kidding. Johnson, thank you so much again for the question. We'll play the question right now, but an appeal, a very impassioned plea, an impassioned appeal to all of you to send in questions. Like if there's any question that you have, anything that you have on your mind that you want to share with me, or anything that you want to ask me that you feel I'm going to be qualified to answer for you, definitely send in those questions. Like send them to me at anubhavjain0712@gmail.com, which is what my email address is. Like preferably in video form or audio form as opposed to written form, because then it just makes it more intimate. I can play your question, I can feature you on the episode. And now coming to Johnson's question.
You are so very interested in learning English words. You are so interested in English language. May I know, is there any particular reason to develop so interest in English language?
Johnson, 2 times in a row, you've asked like an absolutely phenomenal question. Phenomenal question. I swear I thought you were daft as fuck. I'm kidding, mate. I'm kidding. So to answer your question, how exactly did I cultivate this love for words and phrases? Or where does my fascination with words come from? You know, just like your last question, this question was thought-provoking as well. Like it made me sort of delve into my psyche to find out what the answers are. You know, I didn't have the answers ready. Like I actually had to analyze and think about what is it about words that I find so fascinating. What is it about them that makes me so attracted to them? So my answer is divided into 2 parts, or there are a couple of types of reasons. So the first one, hubristic reasons, and the second one, authentic reasons. Let's just get the hubristic reasons out of the way. You know, to be completely honest, earlier, I'd like to think this is not the case as much now. You know, I think the older you grow, the less tendency you have to show off. But at least earlier, one of the reasons why I actually or one of the perverse reasons as to why I actually enjoyed using big words was because I felt that if I use big words, I'll just come across as a smarter person, or I'll just come across as someone who's a lot more impressive to the person with whom I'm having a conversation. So that's like the hubristic reason or the perverse reason. But as I said, you know, I'd like to think that the older I've gotten, the less strong this tendency of mine has become. That's because there are many authentic reasons or non-hubristic reasons to love words. There's something very fascinating about words. Something that fascinates me about them. I am drawn to words the way an American girl is drawn to a guy with a British accent. I think there are some people who are numbers-led, whereas there are other people who are words-led. I used to think that I was numbers-led. That's one of the reasons why I did engineering as well when I was in college. I mean, I still enjoy numbers. I still like numbers. I still respect numbers. But as I've grown older, I've gone from being someone who was earlier predominantly numbers-led to someone who's now become predominantly words-led. So you could say that I've cultivated this tendency of mine, or this nature of mine, to be a words-led person, to be drawn to words, to be attracted to words. In some people, it could be inborn. Maybe some people are born with a fascination with words. And so the only explanation there is that, yeah, it's a part of their DNA, or it's a part of their genetic makeup. In my case, maybe it was a part of my genetic makeup to some extent, but I think I've cultivated it over the years. And that's because I think the importance of your communication skills, the importance of wordplay, the importance of being a good conversationalist, the importance of having a strong vocabulary cannot be overstated. It cannot be overstated. It's a universal skill, communication skills. In other words, there's no field. Name one field to me where communication skills don't come in handy. And I'm not just talking about professional fields like in your work environment, but even in your personal life. Everything revolves around communication skills. This is like the skill of all skills. Communication skills, being good with words, being good with phrases, having good command over whichever language you want to have command over, say the English language. When you're good at wordplay, when you have good communication skills, when you have a strong vocabulary, it just gives you the confidence that I can carry out any conversation with aplomb, any conversation whatsoever, be it in my professional field or be it in my personal life. And when you're equipped with that confidence, it feels as if, you're wearing a cloak of invulnerability. Like, I'll be able to tackle any situation that's interpersonal, be it in the professional workspace or be it in my personal life. So much of your success in life depends upon your interpersonal skills. And a big part of your interpersonal skills is how good a communicator you are, how good a conversationalist you are. And that depends upon like how fluent you are with your English speaking or whichever language you primarily end up using, which in turn hinges upon how good you are with words and how much you love words. Like, there's so many times when I have been able to get a good deal in a negotiation because of my communication skills. There are so many times I've been able to impress women because of my communication skills. Like, my ugly visage doesn't impress them. It's my communication skills that impresses them. And when you communicate well, you all of a sudden appear hotter in the eyes of the person that you're interacting with, especially if it's a woman that you're interacting with. You just end up becoming a whole lot hotter. If objectively speaking, you're like a 6.9 out of 10, you end up coming across as like an 8.1 out of 10 if you can communicate well. It just adds to your charisma, like how well you communicate. It adds to your personality. And so much success in life, in any field, personal or professional, as I've said repeatedly, depends upon your interpersonal skills, your communication skills, your conversation skills. Going back to what I was saying about, wooing women, like all of it hinges upon how well you speak with her. Like, something funny that I like saying is that I enjoy wordplay a lot more than I enjoy foreplay. Such is my fascination with words and phrases and proverbs. But both are connected. Good wordplay can lead to foreplay, if you know what I mean. Having said all of that, there's also a downside that's associated with having a very good vocabulary or being very good with words. There's a curse of a good vocabulary. And I remember this one time when I was doing a podcast with Peter Drury, by far the best football commentator there is. I asked Peter Drury this question because Peter Drury is someone who's exceptional with words. If you think I'm good, Peter Drury is mera baap ka baap ka baap ka baap. In fact, there's a lot that I've learned from Peter Drury as well. When I listen to his commentary, there are so many words that I'm exposed to, new words that I'm exposed to, that I end up making a note of, such that I can add those words to my repository as well, or to my vocabulary. But I asked Peter Drury this question, and Peter Drury said that the downside that's associated with having too good a vocabulary is that sometimes you're a bit too verbose, you're too wordy. If someone can say something in maybe one sentence, you'll say something in 3 sentences, which is criticism that I often get, constructive criticism that I often get. That sometimes I'll end up spending 5 minutes saying something that could be said in 2 minutes or 3 minutes. But I like to think that, you like listening to me speak. So the more the merrier, hopefully. But you aren't as precise in your speech when you have a very strong vocabulary. When words so easily just arrive at the tip of your tongue, it can be difficult to rein in that tendency of yours to continue speaking in a wordy manner, in a verbose manner. So something that I try to remind myself of, or something that, a lot of my bosses in the sports media world remind me of, because I work as a presenter now, and as a presenter, you can't be too wordy, especially when you're doing like television, where you only have like a certain amount of time for a particular show, for a particular segment. You cannot be too wordy. You have to cut straight to the chase. You have to get to the point. Feedback that I get from my bosses, or a healthy reminder from my bosses, is that, Anubhav, keep economy of words in mind. That's the phrase that they use. Economy of words. In other words, less is more. Or another way of saying less is more is addition by subtraction. In other words, use the minimum necessary length you need to say something that you want to say, to convey something that you want to convey. The minimum necessary length. Again, these are reminders for me which have ensured that I've become better, but I'm far from perfect. I'm still very wordy. I'm trying to become more precise with my speech, and these reminders that I talked about are helping me become a lot more precise, in my speech. And the last thing that I'll say while on this topic is that sometimes what happens is whenever you come across a fancy word, you feel, oh, I can replace this fancy word with a common word that I currently use. Let's just say, okay, angry is a word that you use very often, and you come across a synonym of angry that's less commonly used. Let's just say irate. So you feel, oh, now I can replace angry with the sexier alternative or the sexier synonym, irate. While in this case, it might be a very reasonable thing for you to do. You don't necessarily always have to look to find a fancy way of saying everything. Like sometimes the same old thing is the same old thing for a reason. And if you try and coming up with a fancy way or a different way that's much sexier, that has big words, fancy words of saying the same thing, you just come across as a try-hard. Or you might lose your audience because your audience might not be able to relate to what you're saying because it's too fancy. So while it's fine to continue honing your vocabulary, to think about better ways in which you can convey something that comes across as very commonplace or drab, keep in mind that you don't always have to do this. Like sometimes the same old thing is the same old thing for a reason. That discussion on my love for words and phrases and where that stems from is a beautiful segue to the words and phrases that I came across this past week. So I have this habit that I've been following of learning one new English word on a daily basis. So this past week, I learned 7 new words. I added 7 new words to my repository or my vocabulary, and I'm going to be going over all 7 of them. The first is the word gun shy. Gun shy is when you're feeling nervous, when you're afraid, when you're apprehensive about something, especially because of a previous unpleasant experience that you've had. You know, whenever you're slightly frightened or hesitant about something because of a previously bad experience that you've had. For example, she's still gun shy about new relationships, probably because she's had a bad experience with some old relationship of hers. So she's still gun shy about new relationships. Now, when can you use gun shy? You could use it whenever there's something that gives you PTSD, whenever there's something that gives you post-traumatic stress disorder, whenever there's like a previous bad experience that you've had that gives you stress, that gives you stress when you think about it, that makes you frightened or hesitant or afraid to do something similar because of how disastrous or how unpleasant a similar experience was in the past. So you could say, I'm gun shy about this. She's still gun shy about new relationships. The next word that's on my list is the word cogent. Now, cogent is typically used to describe an argument or a case or a reason or an explanation or an opinion. What does cogent mean? Cogent means something that's logical, something that's clear, something that's convincing, compelling, strong, valid. That's a cogent argument. That's a cogent opinion. That's a cogent reason. That's a cogent explanation. Something that's not baseless. So, you know, another way of saying your argument is baseless or your argument falls flat is your argument is not cogent. It's not clear enough. It's not logical enough. It's not convincing enough. Or your explanation is not convincing enough. It's not cogent enough. Example, he makes a cogent argument for improving early childhood education. The next word that's on my list is the word incredulous. It sounds a bit like incredible, but it has a different meaning. Although you could be incredulous when something incredible happens. The word incredulous means not wanting or not able to believe something because of how surprising or how shocking that thing is. And typically showing this as well. So when it's difficult for you to believe something because of how unbelievable that thing is. A few incredulous spectators watched on as Patterson, ranked 23rd in the world, beat the champion. Another example Did you really tell Pete? Rachel said incredulously. I can't believe that you did so. So you could describe your a look as being incredulous. You know, when you have that shocked look, oh my God, that really happened. Like the look that you see on my face, that's an incredulous look. Or your voice could be incredulous. Are you serious? That's an incredulous voice. A silence could be incredulous. So when something shocking has happened, where everyone is speechless. So you could describe that situation as incredulous silence. Everyone looked incredulously is another way of saying everyone was in disbelief. So synonyms of incredulous: skeptical, suspicious, doubtful. Although I will say it's not like an apples to apples comparison, because when you're skeptical about something, you aren't sure if you should or should not be believing it. But incredulous is a lot stronger as a word. Like you are not able to believe it, or you don't want to believe it because of how unbelievable this thing is, because of how implausible this thing is, because of how incredible or shocking this thing is that you're describing. So skeptical, suspicious, doubtful being loose synonyms of incredulous, not quite being perfect matches of incredulous. The next word that I have on my list is the word alacrity. Alacrity. So alacrity is promptness in response, eagerness, enthusiasm, liveliness, briskness. When you respond in a very prompt way, with energy, with enthusiasm. He or she accepted the invitation with alacrity. He or she accepted the money with alacrity. You look forward to Anubhav's videos with alacrity. So similar to alacrity are the words zeal, fervor. When you do something in a zealous manner, or you do something with zeal, with fervor, you do it with alacrity. You could also use it in the physical sense. And that's actually how I came across the word. I'm reading this book about cricket where this coach describes he's comparing Virat Kohli and Cheteshwar Pujara, and he's talking about why Virat Kohli makes for a better slip fielder than Pujara is because Virat Kohli has more alacrity. Like he has better reflexes. He has more agility. So agility and alacrity are similar in the physical sense. In the non-physical sense, instead of using the word zeal and fervor, you could say alacrity. You do something with alacrity, with this eagerness, enthusiasm, promptness, briskness, liveliness. Just like you look forward to Anubhav's videos. The next word is the word haranguing. Haranguing. Jurgen Klopp was sent off for haranguing the match officials. Now, haranguing is the same as scolding, except that it's actually a more intense form of scolding. A more vehement form of scolding, where you're lecturing someone at length in a very aggressive manner, in a very critical manner, where you're berating someone, where you're lambasting someone, where you're castigating someone, you're scolding someone, except you're doing so in a very aggressive manner. It's a very long and intense verbal attack, a bitter tirade, a bitter verbal tirade. So instead of saying, stop lecturing me, you might tell your girlfriend, boyfriend, your better half, stop lecturing me. Another way of saying is, stop haranguing me. Synonyms: lecture, rant, berate, lambast, criticize, castigate, pillory, deliver tirade to. You don't necessarily have to remember all of them, but some of the common ones that you use, like lecture, rant, berate, lambast, these could be replaced by harangue. He harangued the public on their ignorance, where you scold someone in a very bitter manner, in a vehement manner, in an intense and critical manner. Speaking of intense, the next word that I have on my list is the word impassioned. Impassioned, you can describe anything as impassioned if it's filled with passion, it's filled with emotion, it's filled with zeal. Like a speech could be an impassioned speech. A conversation, a book, a novel could be impassioned. Even you could be someone who's impassioned. I definitely feel like I am impassioned. And I think maybe the way I'm speaking in this podcast is a testament to that. An impassioned appeal for peace, an impassioned speech, an impassioned piece of writing, an impassioned plea for help, impassioned protests. Synonyms we've already gone through: emotional, passionate. Something that's heartfelt is impassioned. Something sincere, earnest, zealous, intense, heated, fiery, that's all impassioned. And the seventh and the last word that's on my list is the word exhorted. Now, exhorted means to encourage someone or to persuade someone to do something, except that it's a much stronger version of encouragement, where you're strongly encouraging or strongly trying to persuade someone to do something. Similar words that we commonly use, the word urge. Instead of saying, oh, I urge you to do this, I exhort you to do this. Instead of saying, I encourage you to do this, you could say, I exhort you to do this. Other words that are similar, spur, to goad, to incite, maybe to badger as well, if you're doing so in a very annoying manner. Oh, stop badgering me, stop exhorting me. I exhorted her to be a good child. Where I strongly encouraged or tried to persuade her to be a good child. I exhorted her to be a good child. And the last thing that's on my list as a part of this episode is this beautiful excerpt, beautiful excerpt that I came across in this book that I'm reading. I talked about this book in my last solo episode about 2 weeks back. But as you can tell, I'm a very slow reader. I read at a snail's pace. It's so funny because I speak so fast, but I read so slowly. This book called Coaching Beyond My Days with the Indian Cricket Team. It's this book by R. Sridhar, the former fielding coach of Team India. And he's in this chapter, he's basically talking about captains and leaders that he's worked with. So he talks about Virat Kohli, he talks about MS Dhoni, and he's talking about, like the different characteristics that these strong personalities or leaders or captains have that make them really stand out. And this was a paragraph where he was paying tribute, or he was paying an ode to MS Dhoni. And he was talking about MS Dhoni's attributes. And he said that something that he learned from MS Dhoni is that you should never want anything too much. His philosophy, he's referring to MS Dhoni, his philosophy was simple. When you want something too much or too badly, you get attached to it. Once that happens, emotion comes between you and what you are trying to achieve. His view was that if you want something too much, you should find a way of letting go of it and strike a middle path where you develop detached attachment. How beautiful is that phrase? Detached attachment. Where you want something, so you are attached to it, but at the same time, you're attached in a very detached manner. You aren't overly attached to it, where that thing ends up completely dictating every fucking aspect of your life because of how strongly attached you are to it. So have an attachment, but have detached attachment. Be able to take a step back as well, as opposed to being so embroiled in what you're attached to. He continues in the book, and this is something MS Dhoni was telling the team during a team meeting. When it comes to test cricket, the problem with some of you is that you want it too badly. If you want something that bad, you tend to overthink and overanalyze. You tend to get a little stiff and your body is not at its best. You have to let go. Then you can see the results for yourself. How beautiful. Such a massive lesson in these lines. Whenever you're too desperate for something, it ends up eluding you. I'm pretty sure this is something you must have experienced in your life as well. So yes, it's good to have goals. It's good to have objectives. It's good to strive for something. But then every now and then, detach yourself from it. Otherwise, all your happiness, all your sadness will be dictated by that one thing. You cannot give so much control over your happiness and or sadness to one particular thing. Naval Ravikant also talks about something similar that I think I talked about in my last solo episode, where Naval Ravikant says that the more desires you have, or the more attachments you have, the higher your suffering. And so if you want to reduce your suffering, reduce the number of desires that you have. Now, that doesn't mean you have zero desires. Unless, of course, you want to live like a monk. Like a fucking Jay Shetty. It's okay to have desires, but limit the number of desires that you have. Or have one very strong, overwhelming desire. But then accept the fact that that one strong desire that you have will be the axis of your suffering. You have to accept that. That will cause suffering. So one of the ways in which you can reduce your suffering is by reducing the number of desires. But even with the desires that you choose to have, or that one big desire that you choose to have, practice detached attachment, as MS Dhoni called it. Be attached to it, but in a slightly detached manner, such that it doesn't end up completely taking over your life. What a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful paragraph that I had to share with all of you on this episode of the podcast. Now, hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, I would definitely encourage you to be as attached to this podcast as possible. Being attached to this podcast will not give you suffering. It's only going to give you happiness. And so you don't have to be detached. You don't have to be attached in a detached manner. Loved the last 1 hour 15 minutes that we spent with each other. If you have any suggestions for the podcast, let me know. Send them to me at anubhavjain0712@gmail.com or just comment. Actually comment. Comment for the algorithm. Comment for the algorithm. Because commenting and liking this video will make the algorithm tick, just like your love, unconditional support makes Anubhav tick. So comment for the algorithm, like the video. But if you have any questions that you want to send in, that you want to be featured on this podcast, then definitely send that to me via email, preferably in audio or video form, as I said. It makes it a lot more intimate. That's it for this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you guys. Even when I speak with you guys through a camera, I bloody enjoyed so much. Imagine how enjoyable it's going to be if we actually meet in person one day. I shouldn't say if. I should say when we meet in person one day. I think it's only a matter of time before we actually end up meeting in person. Karte hai sometime soon. Maybe we can start with Bombay. Since I'm in Bombay, we can do like a Bombay meetup. So in case you guys who are still watching, if any of you live in Bombay, let me know in the comment section. चलो खत्म, बहुत बातें कर लिए. Conversation junkie हूँ, लेकिन इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि मतलब बातें करते रहूँगा. You know, there has to be a limit to that. Thank you so much for being a part of this beautiful experience that I had recording this podcast. Until next time, take care, stay safe, keep smashing it, and cheers.